You're listening to The Echoes with me, Emily Andrew, the self-development podcast that explores personal stories, powerful tools, and an insight into the wide world of mental, physical, and spiritual health. Get ready to get curious, be inspired, and connect in. Welcome back to The Echoes. I have absolutely been loving sharing the conversations in this series, in this season with you, I should say. They've been really, really beautiful for me to be a part of, and I'm just really grateful that you are hearing them. You are listening to people's stories all about new modalities, and you seem to really enjoy it, which I'm so grateful for. Just before I kick off on a solo episode today, talking a little bit more about EFT and the differences between clinical EFT, something that you might do in a session with a practitioner like myself, or something that you might see on Instagram or TikTok or online somewhere. I want to just remind you that this podcast is supported, sponsored, whatever you want to call it, by my online membership platform, MB On Demand. You can access 100 plus Pilates and Barre videos, all with different lengths, different kind of challenges, whether you're a beginner to Pilates or you've been doing it for years. There is also a library of resources like EFT, meditations, and other tools that are there to support your mental and physical well-being. It is everything that I do put into a really accessible online platform. And as you're listening to this, I want to give you a special code, and you will be able to get 50% off for the first year that you are an MB On Demand member. Of course, it's cancel anytime. So if you join and you decide it's not for you, you can cancel. But you can get 14 days free. And then using the code ECHOES, you will get 50% off the first 12 months. And that means that you will be accessing hundreds of workouts and well-being sessions for just £7.49 a month. So it's a huge opportunity to go and try something new, to try and kind of bring everything together that we talk about when we're talking about mental well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being. And I'm really excited to share it with you. So go check it out. This week, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the differences between clinical EFT and what you'll see on social media. And I feel called to talk about this because it's one of the big things when it comes to EFT, and it's one of the challenges as a practitioner to really be able to communicate. Because the reality is, when it comes to EFT, it is a really powerful modality, and I explain it in a way where you can use it in different levels. So if you imagine a table, you can clean up the table. So if you think about anxiety, anxiety is the table. If you're experiencing anxiety, you can use EFT, basic EFT, to clean up the tabletop. So you can kind of clean it up whenever you're feeling anxious. If you're feeling particularly anxious on a particular day, you are able to reduce the anxiety in the moment. So it's kind of like a first aid, emotional first aid technique. But when you work with a practitioner, we are interested in what's beneath. So, what is it that keeps the table standing upright? And usually that is things like experiences, beliefs, any trauma. There's a kind of a lot of things that can be underneath the tabletop. There can be many, many table legs. And there are certain things with EFT. You can use basic EFT, but there are also other techniques within clinical EFT. And you can use them to kind of knock a leg out. And you'll find that the more legs you knock out, the more likely that the table actually can collapse. So you may not find yourself identifying with I am an anxious person anymore. And it's really powerful, is what I'm trying to say. But when you are doing some of the work on that, sometimes memories might pop up, and some of these memories might feel quite uncomfortable. And if you are not used to that happening, and if you don't have the kind of tools or the confidence in the technique to support yourself in that, or you aren't supported in that, it can be problematic, because if you have a really distressing memory pop up and you don't know what to do with it, that can be a really isolating experience, and that can feel very distressing and uncomfortable. So, the reason why a lot of the time you will see online what I would call social media tapping, or um, positive tapping, or affirmation tapping, it isn't clinical EFT, I think, is that reason. Because if we were to really use a lot of the things that builds up and makes up clinical EFT online, we are putting people at risk of having what we call an abreaction, which could be something, they might get flooded with a feeling that feels very uncomfortable. And that just isn't a very ethical thing to do. So that's one of the reasons why. But I've kind of made a list of the differences between clinical EFT and social media tapping to give you an idea about what to expect, and so that you can go and you can see and you can notice the differences. Because a lot of the time when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, EFT doesn't work for me," that's always the question that I ask. It's, did you do it with a practitioner, or were you following a video online? Were you following kind of a script? And normally they say, "Oh, I've been, doing it on YouTube." And when you're doing it on YouTube, it is very rare that you will be doing clinical EFT, because one of the key elements of clinical EFT is that it is specific. It's specific to the issue, and also specific to you having this issue. So if you take somebody who has a phobia of public speaking, some people, they might have a phobia because of an event that happened. Perhaps they had to do a talk when they were at school when they were younger, and they messed up and everybody laughed at them, and it kind of created this kind of trauma in the body. But for other people, it could be that they have a deep fear of being seen. Perhaps that might be rooted in trauma, but that would be slightly different. So, when you're working on something that is specific, you need to figure out your unique recipe, your specific points of that, which is why when you're looking at a script, you're what we're doing there is we're just taking the general idea about it, and then we're putting in like how we might be experiencing that, or common threads that are experienced in that. And some of them might hit and they might land with you, and that's amazing. But some of them might not. And that's absolutely fine. But it's just knowing that that doesn't mean that EFT doesn't work. It's just that you need something that is more specific for you. Or perhaps you need to start to find your own connection to it. So I always say with my clients, if I say something that doesn't feel correct, use that as an invitation to ask yourself the question. So if I say, for example, I'm feeling this anxiety in my chest, and they go, "Oh, actually, it was in my chest, but it's moved down to my stomach," then that is the kind of insight for them. Oh, it's moved. It's down in my stomach. Whereas if they just didn't like connect to that internal realization, and they're still tapping on the anxiety in their chest, we're not really going to get very far. So social media tapping that you see online is a lot more general. And when I'm talking about social media tapping, I'm generally talking about like good social media tapping, because I think that there are different levels. You've got the general, but it's based around a theme. It still is basically based on basic EFT, which is our setup statement and then tapping around the points on specific words or feelings or emotions. So it's based on that. Um, and it is, you might see on social media that it's based in what might look like the negative, but I just like to call it the truth. So if you are tapping on anxiety, you're not saying, "Oh, I feel calm, comfortable, relaxed." Like, you are feeling anxious. I feel it in my chest. I am worried, etc. And that's what I call like good social media tapping. You will probably have also seen this stuff on social media, which I would call like positive tapping, which is where they don't focus on the negative, they don't focus on the truth. It's more positively geared towards stuff. So, people would be like, "Oh, here's a tap to help you to reduce stress." And then they'll just be tapping on, "I'm feeling calm, I'm feeling relaxed, like my body is relaxed, everything's going to be okay." And that to me is positively geared. That is really quite it's much further away from clinical EFT than perhaps we would like. There is use in it because the actual tapping helps to reduce cortisol, helps to reduce blood pressure, heart rate. You've got the physical effects of the tapping, but cognitively, you're not really going to make any big steps with positive tapping from my experience and from what I've seen. And I think a lot of EFT practitioners would probably agree with that. There is always a time and a place for positive tapping, but it's usually when you've cleared out the stuff that's getting in your way to feeling that positively in the first place. The other thing with social media tapping, whether it be like more positive or the truthful aspect of it, is it will usually guide you into what we call a reframe. So thinking slightly differently about the situation. And that is really talking about, if you're tapping, what naturally happens with clinical EFT, if you're working with somebody and you're working on an issue, you'll notice that as the emotional intensity of those feelings surrounding the issue come down, they're able to think more clearly about the situation, or maybe they're able to reframe it to think differently about it. So they might say, "Oh, actually, it wasn't really my fault." They might be beating themselves up about something and they've got all this guilt and this shame and this anger. You tap all that down. And then they might turn around and say, "Well, actually, it wasn't my fault. I didn't know any better." And that is what we call the reframe. And that is where you've got that cognitive shift from thinking about your problem in one way to thinking about it in another way. But when you're following a video, the person recording the video doesn't know when that shift might happen for you. They don't know exactly what that shift might be. So we have to essentially kind of package it up at the end with a suggestion of how we might reframe it. And again, it's all about just a suggestion for you. If you want to accept that suggestion, great. If you tap on the suggestion and you feel a rejection in your body or in your mind, then that is an insight. And I think that is still very much a worthwhile experience because now you know what you need to tap on next. But that is one of the big things with social media tapping is you are guided. And I've started calling any guided tapping that I do tapping meditations instead of EFT, because tapping meditations gives you the freedom to know that this isn't clinical EFT, this isn't specific, this isn't using your words, the client's words. It may be focusing on the truth, the negative, but it may not be. But we are still looking to create some reduction of the stress in the body, whether that is emotional stress, physical stress, whatever that might look like. Um, and also perhaps getting ourselves to think slightly differently. So if we call it a tapping meditation, or this is my opinion, if we call it a tapping meditation, it's clear. So people can use it just as they would a meditation, but perhaps with slightly more impactful results because you can clear some of the emotions if it does connect to you. And I always invite people that work with me in a group situation, if I do something like a tapping meditation, focus on your truth over the words that I say. My words are suggestions. My words are like invitations to ask yourself the question, Is it that I feel this way, or do I feel slightly different? If you've only ever done social media tapping, or you've just seen videos and you've never done clinical EFT before, I've pointed out some of the key features already. But I also wanted to add that when you do clinical EFT, you will be more likely to be a collaborative partner in the actual session. So I, as a practitioner, do not have magic words, unfortunately. Um, and the magic to EFT is being able to put it towards you. So you would be asked, okay, how do you feel about this? Where do you feel this emotion or this feeling in your body? Where could this, and if you didn't know, you could guess. Like, there's lots of different ways, but there are also certain techniques that I mentioned before, like the movie technique and tell the story techniques, that are distancing techniques. So if we're working on something quite hard, something quite deep that feels quite uncomfortable perhaps to talk about, then there are techniques within EFT that you don't have to be talking about it. You don't have to be saying the most traumatic day that ever happened to you out loud, but you're able to still look at processing it, and you will naturally start to process and reframe yourself, and it is all led by you. So we only ever change the wording when your wordings change. Me as a practitioner, I never put words in your mouth. If you do work with someone and they are kind of leading you, putting words in your mouth, perhaps they may not be the right person if that doesn't fit for you, because clinical EFT needs to be specific and it's measurable. We also look very much at how we measure these feelings. We use the SUDS. I always want to say SUD scale, but that's not right. It's SUD scale because it stands for Subjective Units of Distress Scale. So if you're saying SUD scale, effectively you're saying Subjective Units of Distress scale, which is just not necessary. But the point with that is that that is our rating. It's subjective. We think about an emotion that we're feeling in our body. 0 would be we don't feel it at all. 10 would be I feel this as strongly as I believe I could right now. And then when you're working with clinical EFT, we're always checking in on that number because we want to measure the progress, and it helps you to measure where you're at as well. And you might notice that another emotion pops in when one slightly goes down, and you might follow that instead. And there's lots of different ways, and it's a lot more flowing with working with a practitioner because it is really based around you and your experience. So if you do find that you start to get quite upset or overwhelmed, perhaps we would lead back into something like silent tapping or grounding or just resourcing so that you feel more comfortable. Whereas if you are tapping online, following a script, and you become very distressed, very upset, for some people, they may feel like they need that and they want that. But generally, it's better to err on the side of caution and just go back to something like a grounding or a silent tapping, because we're just bringing the body back and re-regulating ourselves a bit more to resource ourselves so that if we do start to step into that space again, we can do so feeling much more calm and in control, and less like we might kind of flood with emotion or feel very distressed, or perhaps kind of jump up the nervous system and then be left with, dysregulation and nightmares and feeling really, really ill or overly tired. And there's lots of different signs with that. I hope that that gives you a little bit of a insight into the differences between the two. So clinical EFT, specific, measurable, uses the client's words. It focuses on the truth, which is usually negative. It focuses on feelings in the body, emotions, thoughts. It looks at the client as the collaborator of the experience. So the client will naturally begin to process and reframe. We would use a range of different techniques within that. And we know when we're talking about all these incredible results from research trials, clinical EFT is the thing that got them. So it wasn't positive tapping. It wasn't um, some of the crazy stuff that you might see online. It is clinical EFT. So when we talk about clinical EFT, having a wealth of information, a wealth of evidence and research and journal articles and blind studies and all of this stuff, we are talking about clinical EFT. And although there is a strong anecdotal evidence for some of these other slightly more nuanced ways that practitioners particularly like to work, that is not clinical EFT. So things where we are, when somebody who's very well known in the EFT world and they might have their own brand of EFT tapping, that hasn't been scientifically studied unless they can show you that proof and show you that evidence. It always comes back to clinical EFT as the kind of gold standard of tapping. Social media tapping has its place. It's great if you're new to it. It's great if you are ready to start to do some work, but you feel like there might be a lot of trauma behind things. So actually focusing on more positive stuff might work for you because the tapping is going to help you to regulate your nervous system. It might just help you to start the process of that letting go, that healing, that re-regulating. But generally, tapping on social media will be much more general. It will be based on basic EFT, but it may not follow the same structure. It may be more positively geared. Um, I would say avoid like the plague the money ones that's like, I'm abundant. I have a wealth of money. I am abundant. Because unless you're going to use those as insights into seeing what your tail enders are, which is the little voice that goes, but I'm not, but I never have been, but everyone in my family is bad with money. Unless you're going to find those insights, it's a little bit pointless, apart from the fact that you're getting the stimulation of the acupressure points. And it also guides you towards a reframe. So it guides you into thinking slightly differently, perhaps. And the reason why it is that way is because I believe a lot of practitioners that are mindful, are ethical, don't want to trigger other people. They don't want to trigger people when they can't see them in front of their faces, when they can't help that person if they do become overwhelmed. So I do think it is a responsibility for practitioners to be able to put things out there that are a little bit more perhaps positively geared or slightly further away from clinical EFT. But we need to learn to start to distinguish between this is clinical EFT, this is tapping, or this is tapping meditation, or this is positive tapping, just so that we can start to clear up some of the confusion around what tapping is, what EFT is, and how useful it can be. So I hope that this helps you as a listener or a watcher if you're on YouTube to distinguish as you go ahead whether you're interested in EFT or not, but it helps you to distinguish the differences because I think that is a really powerful piece of information. And you might find that on certain days you would lean towards social media esque tapping. And when you're ready, you might look at working with a practitioner or becoming, doing your level 1 or 2 and really learning in depth about EFT and how to utilize it for yourself. But whatever you do, however you use this information, I just wanted to pop a little episode out because I just fancied it. And I haven't talked about EFT for so long. And I just feel like I miss it. I've been in the depths of my case studies for my hypnotherapy course, and I'm absolutely loving it. But I miss EFT, and I've got some really, really exciting stuff coming up soon with EFT. I've got workshops coming up in Cheltenham and online. I have some special work which I can't talk about yet. I have festivals, so I'm going to be at the big retreat in May, which is like 6 weeks away, and that feels wild. I'm going to be doing 2 or 3 workshops, actually, EFT workshops, and I'm also going to be on a panel. talking about sobriety, which is something a little bit different for me. I haven't done that in such a formal way, but I cannot wait. And then if you are local to Cheltenham, I'm going to be at Soul Circus again, well, as well in August. So more things to be announced, more things coming, but I feel so good just coming back and sitting in my EFT with my EFT hat on and chatting a little bit more about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope that you can take something from it. I'd love to know what you want to hear about, whether it's different modalities, whether it's how to come at different situations, or if it's just more incredible conversations with incredible people, because I have been loving them, absolutely loving them. So I hope you have done too. Let me know how you are, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.